The rain pounded the pavement like 1,000 unspoken apologies, each drop a reminder of the words Eli would never hear from his father. At 17, he stood outside the only home he'd ever known, his backpack slung over one shoulder, soaked to the bone but burning with defiance. "You're no son of mine," his father's voice echoed in his head, a jagged blade that cut deeper than the storm ever could. Eli Carter had always known he was different. Growing up in the quiet suburbs of Asheville, North Carolina, where picket fences and church potlucks defined normalcy, he'd hidden his truth for years. He'd buried his feelings beneath football jerseys and forced smiles, hoping to blend into the mold his father, Tom, had carved for him, a tough, all-American boy destined for a predictable life. But love, as Eli learned, doesn't stay buried forever. It claws its way out, raw and unapologetic, and when it did, it cost him everything. It started with a single moment of courage. At school, Eli had met Jamie, a trans girl with a laugh like summer and a spirit that refused to be dimmed. Her colorful braids and fearless attitude drew him in, not as a crush, but as a beacon, a reminder that living authentically was worth any price. They'd spent months as friends, sneaking away to the local coffee shop to share dreams over steaming lattes, Eli confessing his truth in whispers. He was gay, and he was tired of pretending. Jamie had held his hand, her painted nails a stark contrast to his trembling fingers, and said, "You're enough, Eli, just as you are." That night, Eli made the mistake of believing her. He came out to his father during dinner, the words tumbling out between bites of meatloaf. Tom's face had frozen, his fork clattering to the plate. "What did you just say?" he'd growled, his voice low and dangerous. Eli repeated it, heart pounding, hoping for a crack in his father's armor. Instead, Tom exploded. "Not in my house. Not my son." The argument spiraled, shouts, tears, a slammed door, and ended with Eli on the porch, his belongings stuffed into a backpack, the door locked behind him. Now, under the weeping sky, Eli felt the weight of his choice. He wasn't just homeless. He was untethered, a boy cast out into a world that didn't always welcome people like him. But as he stood there, Jamie appeared, her umbrella a splash of color against the gray. "You're not alone," she said, her voice steady. "We'll figure this out together." And in that moment, Eli knew he'd fight, not just for survival, but to prove his father wrong. They found refuge at a local LGBTQ+ youth shelter, a cramped but warm space run by a woman named Marla, whose kind eyes and no-nonsense attitude made it feel like a haven. The shelter was a patchwork of stories, teens like Eli, rejected for who they were, yet clinging to hope. Marla gave Eli a cot and a hot meal, but more than that, she gave him purpose. "You've got fire in you, kid," she said. "Use it." Eli wasn't sure what she meant, but the words stuck, a seed planted in the chaos of his heart. Over the next few weeks, Eli and Jamie became inseparable. Jamie introduced him to a world he'd only glimpsed online, drag shows in hidden bars, pride flags tucked into alleyways, a community that thrived in the margins. Eli marveled at their resilience, their joy in the face of rejection. He started volunteering at the shelter, helping younger kids with their homework or listening to their fears. Each story mirrored his own, a parent's disapproval, a slammed door, and Eli felt a spark ignite. He wasn't just surviving. He was building something new. But home lingered in his thoughts. Tom's face, twisted with anger, haunted him. Eli's mother, Sarah, had died when he was 10, leaving a void Tom filled with rigid expectations. Eli remembered the good times, fishing trips, late-night talks about baseball, but those memories felt like relics now, buried under Tom's refusal to accept him. Still, Eli couldn't shake the hope that his father might change. He wrote letters he never sent, pouring his heart onto pages he hid under his pillow. "I'm still your son," he'd write, the words blurring with tears. One night, Jamie caught him writing. "You don't owe him anything," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But if you need to say it loud. Make him hear you." Her words sparked an idea, bold and terrifying. Eli didn't just want to survive. He wanted to be seen, not just by his father, but by everyone who'd ever turned away a kid like him. He began to dream of something bigger, a way to show the world that love, in all its forms, was worth fighting for. Eli's idea took shape in the shelter's common room, where he and Jamie sat surrounded by crumpled notebooks and half-empty coffee cups. He wanted to organize a vigil, a public gathering to honor queer kids who'd been rejected by their families, a space to share their stories and demand change. "It's not just for me," Eli told Jamie, his voice trembling with conviction. "It's for all of us." Planning the vigil was a lifeline. Eli threw himself into it, channeling his pain into purpose. He and Jamie spent hours designing flyers, their hands smudged with marker ink as they brainstormed slogans. "Love is not a sin, and family is who accepts you." Marla connected them with local activists, including a lawyer named Carla who offered to help with permits. The vigil would take place in Pack Square, Asheville's heart, a bold choice for a town where conservative values often clashed with its artsy, progressive undercurrent. But the work wasn't easy. Eli faced skepticism, even from those who meant well. "A vigil? Here," one volunteer asked, eyebrows raised. "You'll draw attention, good and bad." Eli knew the risks. Asheville wasn't a monolith. For every rainbow flag, there was a church sign preaching traditional values. Still, he pressed on, fueled by the faces of the kids at the shelter. Kids like Mia, a quiet 15-year-old who'd been kicked out for being non-binary, or Marcus, whose parents had sent him to conversion therapy before he ran away. Jamie was Eli's rock, her optimism infectious. She'd show up with playlists to keep their spirits high, blasting queer anthems while they stuffed envelopes. "We're gonna make them listen," she'd say, her eyes gleaming. But privately, Eli worried. What if no one came? What if his father saw the flyers and showed up, only to reject him again? The thought gnawed at him, but he pushed it down, focusing on the vigil's details: speakers, candles, a stage for open mic. As the event drew closer, Eli's past crept back. He'd see his father's truck around town, a rusted blue Ford that carried memories of better days. Once, he spotted Tom at a gas station, their eyes meeting for a fleeting second before Tom looked away. The dismissal stung, but it also hardened Eli's resolve. He wasn't doing this for Tom's approval anymore. He was doing it for himself, for Jamie, for every kid who'd been told they didn't belong. The night before the vigil, Eli couldn't sleep. He sat on his cot, staring at a photo of his mother he kept in his wallet. Sarah had been soft-spoken but fierce, the kind of woman who'd sneak him extra cookies and tell him to dream big. "What would you think of me now, Mom?" he whispered, tracing her smile. He imagined her at the vigil, cheering him on, and the thought gave him strength. The morning of the vigil dawned clear, the air crisp with autumn. Pack Square buzzed with activity as Eli and Jamie set up. Volunteers strung fairy lights, and a local band tuned their guitars, donating their music to the cause. By noon, people started arriving: teens from the shelter, allies from the community, even a few curious onlookers. Eli's heart raced as he scanned the crowd, half hoping, half dreading to see his father. When the vigil began, Eli took the stage, his knees shaking but his voice steady. "We're here because love isn't a choice, but acceptance is," he said, the microphone amplifying his words. The crowd cheered, and Jamie squeezed his hand backstage. One by one, kids shared their stories. Mia's voice cracked as they spoke of their parents' rejection. Marcus's anger burned through his words about conversion therapy. Eli listened, tears in his eyes, feeling the weight of their collective pain and power. As the sun set, candles flickered across the square, each flame a testament to resilience. Eli felt alive, like he'd finally found his place. But as he stepped off the stage, he saw a familiar figure in the crowd, Tom, standing at the edge, his face unreadable. Eli's heart stopped. Was his father here to condemn him, or had something changed? Eli froze, the candle in his hand trembling as he locked eyes with his father. Tom stood apart from the crowd, his work boots planted firmly on the grass, his face a storm of emotions Eli couldn't untangle. For a moment, the vigil's warmth, the music, the cheers, the flickering lights, faded, and it was just the two of them, a father and son divided by words neither could take back. Eli wanted to run, to hide, but Jamie's hand on his shoulder anchored him. "You've got this," she whispered. He nodded, swallowing hard, and stepped toward Tom, the crowd parting like a sea. Each step felt like a mile, the weight of their last fight pressing down on him. "What are you doing here?" Eli asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to the stage where Mia was now speaking, their voice raw with pain. "I saw the flyer," he said gruffly. "Didn't expect this." His words hung heavy, vague but loaded. Eli braced for anger, but Tom's expression softened, just a fraction. "You did all this?" he asked, gesturing to the crowd. "Yeah," Eli said, defiance creeping into his tone. "For kids like me. Kids you threw out." The accusation landed hard, and Tom flinched, his hands balling into fists. But he didn't lash out. Instead, he looked at the ground, his silence louder than any shout. The vigil continued around them, a tide of voices and light. Jamie took the stage, her presence electric as she shared her story of coming out as trans, of losing her family, but finding a new one in the shelter. Eli watched Tom's face as Jamie spoke, searching for a sign, anger, shame, anything. What he saw was something else, a crack in the armor, a flicker of doubt. When Jamie finished, the crowd erupted, and Eli felt a surge of pride. He turned to Tom, ready to walk away, but his father spoke first. "I didn't know," Tom said, his voice rough. "About all this. About you." It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was more than Eli had expected. He didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded, his throat tight. The vigil ended with a group song, the band leading the crowd in a cover of Born This Way. Eli joined in, his voice blending with hundreds of others, and for the first time in months, he felt whole. Tom stayed until the end, lingering at the edge of the square, watching. When the crowd dispersed, he approached Eli again. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice softer now. They sat on a bench, the night air cool against Eli's skin. Tom spoke haltingly, his words a mix of confession and confusion. He talked about Sarah, how her death had broken him, how he'd clung to control to keep from falling apart. "I thought I was protecting you," he said. "Thought I was raising you right. But I was wrong." Eli listened, torn between anger and hope. He wanted to forgive, but the hurt ran deep. "You kicked me out, Dad," he said, his voice breaking. "You made me feel like I was nothing." Tom's face crumpled, and for the first time, Eli saw tears in his father's eyes. "I know," Tom whispered, "and I hate myself for it." They didn't solve everything that night. There were no grand apologies, no tearful hugs. But there was a start, a fragile bridge built on a single conversation. Tom promised to try, to learn, and Eli promised to give him a chance. As they parted, Eli felt a weight lift, not gone but lighter. Back at the shelter, Jamie was waiting. "How'd it go?" she asked, her eyes searching his. Eli smiled, weary but hopeful. "It's a start," he said. And in that moment, he knew the vigil wasn't just for the kids in the square. It was for him, for Tom, for the possibility of healing. The weeks after the vigil were a delicate dance. Eli stayed at the shelter, but Tom started texting, short, awkward messages at first, like "saw a rainbow flag downtown today, or you okay?" Eli didn't always respond, but he read every word, holding them like fragile glass. He wasn't ready to go home, not yet, but the hope of it kept him going. At the shelter, Eli's work grew. The vigil had caught the attention of local news, and donations poured in: blankets, clothes, even a grant to expand the shelter's programs. Marla put Eli in charge of a new youth group, a space for teens to share their stories and plan more events. Eli thrived, his confidence growing with each meeting. He wasn't just a kid anymore. He was a leader, someone others looked to for strength. Jamie, meanwhile, was dreaming bigger. She wanted to take the Vigil National, a series of events to amplify queer voices across the country. "We could call it Light the Way," she said one night, sketching logos on a napkin. Eli laughed, caught up in her enthusiasm. "You're unstoppable," he told her, and she grinned. "Only because I've got you." But not every day was bright. Eli struggled with the scars of his father's rejection. Some nights, he'd wake up gasping, the memory of that slammed door choking him. Jamie would sit with him, her presence a reminder that he wasn't alone. "You're building something amazing," she'd say. "Don't let the past steal that." Tom, too, was trying. He started attending a local PFLAG group, a support network for parents of queer kids. Eli learned this from a hesitant voicemail Tom left one evening. "I'm learning, Eli. I want to understand." It was a small step, but it meant the world. Eli began to see his father not as a monolith of anger, but as a man grappling with his own flaws, trying to rebuild what he'd broken. One Saturday, Tom invited Eli to coffee. They met at a small cafe downtown, the same one where Eli and Jamie used to hide out. Tom looked different, older, somehow his eyes softer. They talked about small things at first: the weather, Tom's job at the auto shop. Then Tom slid a photo across the table, a picture of Eli and Sarah, taken when Eli was 8, all grins and ice cream stains. "She'd be proud of you," Tom said, his voice thick. "I'm trying to be too." Eli's throat tightened. He wanted to believe it, but trust was a fragile thing. "I need time," he said, and Tom nodded. "I've got time," he replied. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough for now. Back at the shelter, Eli threw himself into Light the Way. He and Jamie worked tirelessly, reaching out to organizations in other cities, planning a second vigil in Raleigh. The work was exhausting but exhilarating, a reminder that their voices mattered. Eli started speaking at schools, sharing his story to packed auditoriums. Each time, he thought of Tom, hoping one day his father would see him not as a disappointment, but as a son who'd found his purpose. As winter approached, Eli felt a shift. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. The shelter had become a home, not just for him, but for dozens of others. And while his relationship with Tom was still a work in progress, there was hope, a spark that grew with every text, every coffee, every small gesture of understanding. Spring brought new beginnings. Light the Way had grown beyond Eli's wildest dreams, with vigils planned in 5 states. Eli and Jamie were invited to speak at a national conference for queer youth, their story a beacon for others. Eli stood on stage, his voice strong, telling thousands about the night he was kicked out and the community that caught him. The crowd roared, and Jamie hugged him so tight he could barely breathe. Tom was there, in the back row, unannounced. Eli spotted him during his speech, his heart lurching. After, Tom approached, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "I'm proud of you," he said simply, and Eli felt the words like a wave, washing away years of pain. They didn't hug, not yet, but they stood together, watching the conference unfold, a silent promise to keep trying. Back in Asheville, Eli moved into a small apartment with Jamie, funded by a scholarship from the shelter's grant. It wasn't home in the old sense, but it was theirs, a space filled with laughter, music, and dreams. Eli kept his mother's photo on the nightstand, a reminder of where he'd come from and who he was becoming. Tom visited sometimes, bringing coffee or tools to fix a leaky faucet. Their conversations grew easier, less guarded. Tom admitted he'd been scared, scared of losing Eli, scared of a world he didn't understand. Eli shared his fears, too, and in those moments, they found common ground. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real, messy, human, and full of possibility. One evening, as Eli and Jamie prepared for the next vigil, Eli looked out at the city skyline, the mountains a shadow in the distance. He thought of the boy he'd been, standing in the rain, and the man he was now, building a life he'd never imagined. He'd lost a home, but he'd found a family, not just in Tom, but in Jamie, Marla, and every kid at the shelter who'd taught him what it meant to be brave. The vigil that spring was the biggest yet, with thousands gathering in Pack Square. Eli took the stage, his father in the crowd, and spoke of love, not just romantic, but the kind that binds communities, that heals wounds, that refuses to give up. "We are enough," he said, echoing Jamie's words from that rainy night. The crowd cheered, candles blazing, and Eli felt it, the unbreakable strength of being seen, of being loved, of being home.